Welcome in, everyone. UGA Football Live with JC Shelton, live with none other than former Georgia tight end Arthur Lynch on the Pulse Sports Network on YouTube, or UGA Football Live on Twitter, Instagram. Guys, I really just want to say this first. We really appreciate you guys jumping in. If you get a chance to listen to us on Tuesdays, we switched it from Thursdays. This is a trial run for us. We just started this year, but we really wanted to bring this to you guys, someone who played in a Georgia uniform and someone who wishes he played in a Georgia uniform, talking about some football. We're going to get into the win over UAB for Georgia. We're also going to talk about some of the college football's big games. It was one of the best slates we've had already. And, I think 2015 was the last time we had more AP top 25 matchups in a week. And I did not move. I'll tell you that. It was an awesome day of college football. And then we'll also get into history class with Arthur Lynch, first-time listeners / viewers. Arthur's going to bring us a little history lesson from college football, maybe like something like this day at this time, this happened. So I always love that. And we'll get into, of course, Georgia, Auburn, Deep South's oldest rivalry. We'll get into that as well towards the end, get our predictions as well and how we think the game will go. We'll start it out. Artie, I'm going to throw it to you. Let's get your thoughts on that 49-21 win for Georgia. Little night game action. That was nice. We don't have much of those. Let's get just first thoughts. We'll start it off there.
Yeah, I think first thoughts is we're starting to see an identity being formed for the offense, right? I know there were some, let's call it rumbles. Some people who were a little bit worried in the first couple of games, and I think one thing is clear moving forward. I think Carson Beck is a really good player. I think he is a guy that really understands what Coach Mike Bobo and Coach Smart want. And statistically, right, I know it's tough to shine as a quarterback in this day and age of college football. If you look around the landscape of college football, there are so many studs out there, whether it be Penix at Washington, Williams at USC, surprisingly enough, Bo Nix at Oregon. There's just so many guys putting up really big numbers. But I think Carson Beck, if you look at where he's at right now, statistically, I saw a stat this week, through 3 games or 4 games, whatever it is, he is third all time in passing for one season. The only 2 guys that are ahead of him, obviously, our guy Aaron Murray and Stetson Bennett, who was a Heisman 2-time national champion and Heisman finalist. I know some people were also complaining about Brock Bowers. Why are we not getting him the ball? Why are we not getting putting the ball in our playmakers' hands? And I said at the beginning of the year, we went on our podcast talking specifically about the tight ends. I said, Mike Bobo really likes to use tight ends and likes to use them in ways, so long as he has the guys in the tight end room to make the plays, he will use them in a ton of different ways. And I think if you look at Brock's stats and you look at, statistically where he's on pace to do, Seth Emerson, shout out Seth, great guy, one of my favorites from back in the day, works for The Athletic now. He put out a tweet today, I believe, saying that Brock Bowers is on pace to shatter his single season receiving record. So I think you and I spoke about it last week and the week before, right? I was very concerned, like, hey, what's our identity? And I think what our identity is very similar to what it was back in the kind of 2012, 13, 14 era for our offense, is that Mike Bobo was like, hey, let's really try to balance the offense, establish a run game, but put our receivers and our quarterback in a position to make plays when the defense gives us an opportunity from a schematic standpoint, from a scheme standpoint. And so that's kind of what I saw. Obviously, there's things to clean up, right? Fumbles on special teams, some things on defense that looked a little not soft, as in physical soft, but like, some cracks in the arm, if you will, on defense. I think those things will get cleaned up. I'm never really worried about the defense under this defensive staff, particularly when your head coach is Kirby Smart. But I do think these kind of worries that the Georgia faithful have had about our offense in the past couple of weeks, I think people should start feeling a lot more confident in the unit that we have. Because I think Carson Beck is the guy that's going to be able to continue to lead us. This is going to be a great test for him coming to Auburn. We'll talk about that later. But, yeah, I'm very excited. I was very excited about kind of the whole game. And, and kind of what we saw, particularly out of Brock Bowers, right? Because I think he needed that game to be like, hey, I'm still the dude, I'm still that guy, and he's going to be able to have a big season going forward.
Yeah, no, I'm totally with you on the identity, offensively, especially. My first takeaways were really, I think, the faster start. They didn't come out of the gate scoring a bunch of points, but they scored on that first drive. It looked in rhythm. The offensive line play was really good. I think that set Carson Beck up from the start. He was comfortable from the start. And I think even when, he came on the players' lounge and talked about that first start against UT Martin and how nervous he was, because I heard him all offseason with Aaron Murray talk about how he hadn't really faced pressure. He didn't feel it in his career. And I think he was I don't know if it was Mr. Jacksonville or like Mr. Football in the state of Florida.
I think it was Mr. Football in Florida.
Yeah. So, he was in big games with a lot of pressure as that guy. Came to Georgia, obviously, this is his first time starting in 4 years. So he talked about that pressure, and it really hit him when he took the field against UT Martin. So I think that comfortability was evident in this game. He's much more efficient from really, putting the ball in the receiver's hands in good areas and letting yak happen, throwing them open, hitting those deep shots when they were open. So we talked about the fast start, which I love. I like the red zone success was awesome. I mean, looking back in the first few games, we didn't have that, right? You look at South Carolina, Georgia had 3 drives of 12 plus yards that resulted in 3 total points versus South Carolina. And in this game, 6 for 6 in the red zone. So, that's evident. I know it's UAB, guys. I totally note that. But you want to see this happen, and we'll get into this later, headed into a road SEC matchup. The first time Carson Beck's going to be starting on the road in the SEC. A lot of these guys, the first time they will be attending a road game like this. So something to note going forward. But I think this is a big for their development. And maybe, Artie, you can speak to this a little later as well when I'm done with this long rant about the things you learn from a game like this where you're clicking on all cylinders. Like, you can do it. Like, you've done it in practice. You haven't done it in a game yet, but you did it. In between the hedges on Saturday night in front of 93,000 people. So Beck, we 22 of 32, 338, 3 touchdowns, no picks, so efficient with the ball when you talk about his turnover ratio. The only pick he has thrown this year was on that bobbled catch attempt, not his fault. 1 rush touchdown as well. Brock Bowers, 9 catches, 121. You talked about him and what he did. You just can't bring him down. You cannot bring him down, especially with one guy.
He's unbelievable,
dude. Rosemy Jack-Saint, I mean, he's had a really good year. Obviously Lad McConkey being out, he's had to step up, I think, and he's been much more down the field. And since so far this season, 3 catches for 94 yards versus UAB as well. Arian Smith, finally got a sighting from him. He had a 12-yard touchdown. I'd love to see more from Arian Smith. I feel like he has so much talent and ability. I'm not sure what's holding him back. And Arthur, I don't think we can speak to what's holding him back. You have to be, in that locker room, in that coaching staff with BMAC, receivers coach, and Mike Bobo to get their take on it. But I just don't know why we're not seeing him. I think maybe, a possibility for him to get used in the future. Hopefully, maybe he has something hurting him with the injury department or something like that. But he looks healthy, looks running well. He has so much speed, really can take the top off. And we've seen that in big games in the past. So I'd really like to get his confidence up this season because he hasn't really done much. Rushing wise, it was another good game for the rushing game. We talked about that offensive line and how they played in the second half versus Carolina. Can they keep that going? And I think they did in this game. Obviously, I know it's UAB, 36 carries, 188 yards, 5.2 yards per carry. You average 5.2 in any game this season. I'm going to be very happy. And I think all dog fans should be happy no matter, what happens the rest of the run game. Dejon Edwards, he's the guy, obviously, in most carries. I think Georgia's going to ride him, and I think they should, I think they should. Dejon Edwards, 12 attempts, 66 yards. Dylan Bell had 3 for 22. That's a 7.2 yard per carry. So he's special. Obviously, they didn't give him a lot of snaps there. They gave other running backs that they wanted to see some from in this game, but I think they trust Dylan enough to give him some snaps, especially in Auburn and moving on in the SEC slate. You can do so much with a guy who can catch the ball as a wide receiver, knows how to run routes, knows the keys, and Carson Beck what he wants, plus can run the ball. I think that's a big weapon. And I think Mike Bobo and those guys know that. That's why they're giving him so many touches as a running back. And that 3 for a receiver is a lot. Defensively, we talked about this before we jumped on. The two fumbles on special teams really hurt the defense. I mean, when you look at the points per game, that's, Dog fans, a lot of them maybe didn't catch it, maybe didn't watch the whole game, and then you tune in, you see Georgia allowing 21 points to UAB. It's not really the story, Mekai Muse, Dylan Bell on punt and kickoff, both lost one. You don't see those special team mistakes a lot from this team. I think Georgia puts a lot of emphasis on that, and Kirby Smart, we all know he plays the starters, right? So I think those guys take that seriously, especially the younger guys who want to get on the field more. They know they have to prove themselves there. I don't think that's going to be consistent going forward. We haven't seen that bit this year. We saw it versus UAB. So that really hurt the defense as far as put them in bad positions on the field. Not to say there wasn't some coverages broken right there for a couple scores, but 21 points allowed. I don't think you walk away with that with a bad feeling for your defense because of the positions they were put in. Was really impressed with Xavier Sorey, 6 tackles. A guy who's got more playing time behind Jameis Dumas-Johnson and Smael Mondon. And just to speak about the linebackers a little bit more, CJ Allen, 3 stops. He's playing really well so far this season. And with the injury concern and the way that Georgia rotates linebackers, I was really impressed on how the young guy played. I think there's room for him to really contribute with, Pop Johnson not playing as highly as he did last year. I think that's a fact from the stat sheet. The way Georgia's had some teams rush on them a little bit up the middle. So I think CJ Allen gets some more reps here. Really impressed with Warren Brinson. Had 3 tackles, a sack. It's his first sack of the season. Who is going to be that guy to be a Jalen Carter type to really make teams have to realize where he is at on the defensive line? Because he can play multiple positions around that defensive line. Can you have a guy like that to be kind of Jalen Carter-esque to take the offense's attention? I think he's done a great job this season so far. He's the second highest graded defensive lineman in week 4 by Pro Football Focus. And then Marvin Jones, last guy I'll talk about on the defense right here, took reps with the first team in the start of the game, the first team group, I should say. Had a tackle for loss. I think, he is really exciting to watch on later downs. I mean, he has the body of that typical pass rusher, but also big enough to stop in the run game. I think that's where he has to prove himself a little bit more to see more playing time on first and second down. But so I'm excited to see him. He missed last game. I don't know what it was. He was in sweats versus South Carolina, but he was back versus UAB. Haven't had any update from Kirby or let you know. Arthur, let's talk about final takeaways, maybe in the locker room. What do you think, these guys came away with a win over a lesser team like this, headed into an SEC game? Any thoughts on how maybe the locker room and these coaches are trying to, push the really necessity to set a tone early against Auburn?
Yeah, well, I definitely want to hit on one of the things you mentioned, talking about confidence with Carson Beck, right? And I'm going to preface this by saying in no way, shape, or form am I comparing myself to Carson Beck or being a quarterback at UGA. I mean, the different levels of pressure that come with being the guy, both having the pressure of your teammates counting on you, your coaches counting on you, but really, an entire university and town and community and state, because that's kind of how it goes when you are the guy at a place like University of Georgia, state flagship university for the state of Georgia. But you mentioned something, that Carson said about how he was very nervous, right? I think Carson's a 4th-year junior, right? So he hasn't been a starting quarterback. Yeah, he's played in a lot of big-time games. Yeah, he's uberly talented. But he hasn't been the guy since he was 18 years old. He's probably 21, 22 years old. And I'm not saying that you get complacent in those years from when you are the senior in high school to now. But I know for me personally, I basically took 3 years off from being a starting tight end. I came into University of Georgia, played as a true freshman. Some people who's listening may know or may not know, I came in with Orson Charles. We were both high school All-Americans. He ended up being an All-American, at UGA, and he was the starter really for 3 years. And yeah, I played. Sure, I had responsibilities, and I took those roles seriously. But until you are like the guy, you're playing, 30, 40, 50, 60 snaps. I mean, you need those repetitions, right? For Orson, he probably had nerves for maybe like 2 games his freshman year. And then all of a sudden he's like, wait, I'm the guy. This is just like it was in high school. So I think for Carson, him to be able to get these wins under his belt against the South Carolina team at home, SEC opponent, and now a UAB team, which,
Yeah. And the
are they
comeback too, right? That second
Yeah,
half.
100%. Is University of Alabama Birmingham, University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa? No. But I know this for a fact. Trent Dilfer, NFL Super Bowl winning quarterback, staff, a lot of NFL experience in that staff. Like those guys were well coached. You could tell they were well coached. They played hard. So that wasn't a rollover game, right? So I think for Carson, this game, when we talk about confidence building, he needed to get his feet back under him to being the guy, right? And I think for him, this Auburn game reminds me a lot of the Missouri game that we had, at least for me, back in 2012, Missouri's first year in the SEC. I think it was a 3:30 game, could have been a night game. Jarvis Jones had like a massive strip kind of sack into the end zone. I mean, but it was kind of a first half back and forth, obviously completely different scenarios, but because Georgia's a 2-time defending national champion, and this was kind of a, does Missouri belong? We're going to show them that they don't type deal. But I think what I'm saying is road game, fairly hostile environment. It's going to be loud, 3:30, national TV. I think this is a really good opportunity for Carson Beck to continue to build on what he's been building over the past 4 weeks. And like you said, JC, it's a confidence game, right? Soon enough, we're going to be week 8, week 9, and he's going to be humming all over the field. We're going to be like, what were we worried about week 1, 2, and 3? So definitely want to hit on that. I think it's going to be a big game from a confidence building perspective. But we can get into predictions later. But I think I think he's going to have a solid week, because I think that confidence you can see in his play is creeping back to what it was when he was 17, 18 years old, slinging that thing in Florida.
Yeah. And the identity, the relationship during the game with Bobo and that offensive staff, right? Because you can simulate it as much as, and you could speak to this as much as you can in spring practices and fall camp. But until you get, under the lights with all those fans screaming at you, especially in this SEC road environment, well, I'm definitely going to throw that to you just to explain to me and these viewers what it's like playing in those types of games. But let's jump into right now college football weekend. And I briefly touched on it. If you're just jumping in, briefly touched on it. One of the best weekend slates in college football. It probably will be this season until the postseason, just how many ranked matchups, you never know. But I mean, this was a great Saturday. Really enjoyed watching these games. I'll start with the game that everybody wants to start with, Artie, and that is Coach Prime versus Dan Lanning and the Ducks. And, I was on that Colorado plus 21. I'm not going to lie. Now, I kind of threw football away from that because, I liked TCU in that first game. So I thought, even with Travis Hunter out, okay, they're going to throw the ball around. But then I immediately, as the rest of America noticed in that first drive, the gaping holes that Oregon offensive line was able to create. And Bo Nix was the home version of Bo Nix. Bo Nix on the road. Bo Nix at home. Got to watch out. Artie, I will say one more thing for it. I love Dion. I love what he doing for college football. I'm all here for it. I know people are getting tired of the coverage. I don't care. Of course they're going to pump it. I'm glad to see it. I love Dion. I like the way I like the way he talks to his players. I like how he gets them motivated and thinks they're better than they are, which is, I think, is a big thing for coaches, right? That's how a lot of lesser teams win big games. That's how they make upsets. But as soon as I saw that Colorado was stomping on the O before the game in sweats, and you might have saw a tweet on this, Artie, you might have responded to that, but they were stomping on the O with their sweats during their walkthrough, talking trash to the opposing player as they were warming up and all this stuff. I'm here for a little trash talk. I'm here for that. It's an aggressive game. It's football to me, but I don't think you win a game in sweats. So that kind of, that ticked me off a little bit. I'm not going to lie. I didn't like that at all. But I'm here for Dion. But, man, they got it handed to him on Saturday, Artie.
Yeah, look, I mean, first off, I had a tweet about this, and it went, people it got more attention than I thought it would. I basically was just saying fairly simple, right? Like, why can't we love what Dion is doing, love his kind of like mantra and the program that he's building back up? And yes, Colorado was built up at one point during the 90s. They were national champions. Eric Bieniemy, the offensive coordinator for the Washington Commanders, was an All-American running back for them. Anyway, but I also said, like, hey, we can also love what Dan Lanning is doing and saying, because this is what makes college football great, right? It's like there is so much just pent up emotion, aggression, like visceral reactions, both from coaches, players, fans, you name it. And I didn't think that it was a personal attack on Dion. I think ultimately these coaches, part of their job, why they make tens of millions of dollars, and some of them, yes, do make tens of millions of dollars, is they need to get their team ready to play and will do and say whatever it takes to get them ready. Right? Perfect example, Tom Brady. Tom Brady to this day believes that he is like not respected, even though he's Michael Jordan, universally like well known as the greatest of all time, right? But you need to find the edge no matter what. Now, if we're just talking the X's and O's of that game, Dion said it best when he was at Jackson State. The biggest difference between these big time programs, University of Georgia's, Alabama's, the LSU's, Oregon's, Michigan's, Ohio State's, obviously, yes, you'll have some skill guys like a Marvin Harrison Jr. or Brock Bowers that are just like freaks of nature, right? They're just so much better than everyone, no matter what. But a lot of the skill guys, at Power 5 and then Group of 5, it's a marginal difference. But those beasts up front on the offensive and defensive side of the ball are just a different breed of human being, right? And you got to be able to have not just a starting 5 and a front 4, but 2 deep across the board. You need to rotate 7, 8 of those guys on the defensive line. You got to rotate about 8 or 9 guys on the offensive line, which Georgia does, right? Because ultimately it's such a physical game. No matter how many passing, gurus are out there and air raid this, air raid that, you've got to be able to protect and you've got to be able to get to the quarterback. And in order to do that, you've got to have the beast up front. And Dion said this 2 years ago at Jackson State, or a year ago. He was like, the difference between us and Alabama is not the Shedeur Sanders, my son, and the guy Henry, the DB. It's tackle to tackle and end to end. And I think we saw that, like, snap one, play one. We're like, oh boy, this is It almost looks dangerous at times, right? Because you're like, that defensive lineman, I can't even see him on the camera screen because he is like under a pile of bodies, Yeah. So I think, as much as I love the storyline with Dion, I think he's going to need at least 2 more recruiting classes of both transfers and young pups to get in there and get some depth on the offensive defensive line, because that Oregon team is a machine. You know what I mean? It's a machine.
No, I completely agree with you, and I think that's really consistent from what players say as well in interviews when they're asked about the differences in certain conferences and what have you. The line play,
totally,
it's a big difference, and I do think Dion will get that set. I mean, just what they brought in transfers alone last year, they're probably going to do double that. I don't even know. It's going to be crazy. I think they're going to get a lot of good guys. Really think it makes you think about that TCU game a little bit more. It even surprises me more with that one. But we'll continue on. So FSU over Clemson, great game. In overtime, Clemson controlled the entire game until football happened. Really, that turnover was just huge. And then the miss kicked. And it was so funny because covering a little bit of Clemson football for the Players Lounge, I wrote on last week, and they brought in, I think his name's Will Zeitz. Could be pronouncing his name wrong, but the kicker off the street Clemson got, and they brought him in, kicked for him last year, only made like 3 field goals in an entire career, comes in as a graduate, and Clemson Dabo Swinney says before the game, this could either be a great story or absolutely horrible, something to that effect. And it ended up being absolutely horrible. Put him in that position, missed that kick. I think Clemson would have won that game if not for that turnover. You take away the field goal. I don't even take away that turnover. I think they win that game. So that was interesting. I don't know about FSU still, and that's a tough environment with a tough team, but we'll see. Ohio State over Notre Dame. Man, Notre Dame had so many opportunities. And the craziest thing was they had 10 players on defense for 2 straight of the goal line plays there that lost in that game, which is an incredible mistake by, a defensive head coach as well. And then Marcus Freeman, that was crazy to me. You had Penn State killed Iowa. That was pretty impressive because I think Iowa is one of those tough teams, man. I know that offense isn't going to be humming, but they at least play defense, and that Penn State did impress me. I think you called that last week already. Alabama dominated Ole Miss in my mind. I was really impressed with how they played Milroe, and I think he played with a lot of confidence. I guess the Nick Saban effect, I think he did it on purpose. Nick Saban's a guru. What he did in starting the other guys and then announcing Milroe as the starter the next day to the media and pumped him up to the media. I think Milroe responded. I think the team responded, Alabama. So, they looked good, and that defense played really well against a tough Ole Miss offense and a rushing attack and old Lane Kiffin. What do you think?
Identity, man. We were talking about it earlier, right? Every team needs to find their identity. And I think Alabama's for the past couple of years has been, hey, let's throw this thing, all around the barn. You know what I mean? Let's go up and down the field, score fast, be lethal, and have 3, 4, 5 wide receivers get drafted in 3 years. But those, like we said, bodies, and they got some bodies up front, man. Like I think it's 65. I was like, is that one person or two? You know what I mean? And I think the first half they didn't have their identity yet, but someone said something, or I'd be interested to see if they go on a little bit of a run here. Mm-hmm. If they look back on that halftime adjustment, who spoke, who said what, because they came out in the second half and I was like, oh, this Alabama team reminds me of like Eddie Lacy from 2012. You know what I mean? Like, let's get downhill fast and let's hit some people in the mouth. So
I'm gonna be honest. I think LSU is really the team that's gonna give them a game. I think
totally
so physical. We've seen these other teams that they're gonna play on their schedule not be physical, right? We've seen Tennessee just get out physical by Florida. Bad, right? And what is Alabama? We just talked that physical team, man. They're going to wear you down. I don't care if it's tied in the third quarter. They're going to pull away with that physicality, as long as they don't shoot themselves in the foot, obviously, with turnovers and what have you, missed field
goals.
Which
they have done in the past 2 years, more so than his previous 18. Which again, anyway, that was something that has not clicked for me about these kind of like shooting themselves in the foot, because they have hurt themselves big time in the past couple of years.
Yeah. And if Jaden Daniels can really put the team on his back, LSU, which I think they ask him to do every game, they come away with a win, but that's going to be a tough game. It's going to be a really good one, I think. Last couple of things before we get to history class for Arthur Lynch. USC escaped Arizona State. And if you were a fiend like your boy, you were watching that game after 14 hours or what have you of college football. I say this every week. I've said it since last year, and I'm not wrong yet. USC does not have a defense that can play with these elite teams. They do not. And they should have beat Arizona State the way they were playing by 40 points. If it was the week one, I would not be as adamant about this, but I just do not trust USC's defense. They get worn down, right? They get lost in coverage. Their offense is great. No doubt about it. I'm a full Caleb Williams supporter. I think he wins another Heisman if he stays healthy, depending on how that team does, I think, later in the season. But that defense is really going to bite them. It's going to bite them. I think the Pac-12 overall is playing pretty good defense. But when you look at USC, I don't see them running a tough road game against a physical team, kind of like Tennessee reminds me of right now. LSU over Arkansas by 3. I did like Arkansas all week, and they played up to that. And that's not an easy place to play. I was really impressed by KJ Jefferson and how tough he played in that game. And then Utah over UCLA by a touchdown. Utah, they're one of those teams I think gives USC a really big battle. They have to get Cam Rising back, though. I think they're just they're getting by right now with those backup quarterbacks. But that defense I think it's going to give USC a problem. Any thoughts on the college football weekend before we move on, Artie?
Yeah, I think the USC kind of storyline right now, you hit the nail on the head. Unbelievable offense. Caleb Williams, premier passer, probably the best quarterback in the country. I mean, he is. He was proven to be one of the Heisman last year. But the Pac-12, the great irony of this college football season is the Pac-12 is essentially no more. This is basically the last season.
They have four teams, right? Four teams next year. Yeah.
The Pac-12, as we know it, no, I think two. I think it's down to two. I think it's Oregon State and Washington State, which they had a great game this past week as well. And if you look at the scope of the entire conference, I think you've got like 5 or 6 teams that are ranked. Really good football teams. Oregon State, Oregon, Washington State, Washington, USC, Arizona is very, very improved. So Utah obviously is very, very strong defense. They have USC's number. To your point, I don't know if they're going to go unscathed, USC. I actually really like Oregon and Washington. And then
I will say Oregon is that another team, right, that when they play really good teams, that defense starts lacking. But continue.
It does. No. You're not wrong. You're not wrong. But I just think looking at the scope of the Pac-12 right now. But keep an they on Washington State, man. I think they're a well-coached team. They got some dudes. They got some dudes in that team. But ultimately, I think them and Oregon State are a little bit pissed off that they're now the standard bearers of the Pac-12 and don't think that those storylines and those kind of like digs at your program don't add fuel to the fire for a team throughout the season. So keep your eye out on the Cougars. This in the West Coast. I think they're going to make some noise.
And since we're mentioning them, I don't think we can't not mention Washington and Penix Jr. Now, here's the thing: when you look back at it, especially last year, almost the same team. You give or take some guys, same quarterback. They were at this point last year before they blew up, and that defense caught them, right? It's always that defense, guys. It's always that defense. Now, you can talk about the elite Alabama, Georgia defenses, and even LSU in 2019, they played really well. They did get challenged when they go up against a Georgia, LSU, and Alabama, these teams, each other. That's when that defense, and even Georgia and Ohio State last year, they're going to give way, but can you bend but don't break? And there's a lot of breaking in those games, I think, from those defenses we just discussed. But let's move on to history class with Artie Lynch. First-time viewers, listeners, this is where Artie gives us a day in history in college football. And if you're a college football fan, which you must be if you're even listening to us guys, you should love this. We've had a few of these already, and Artie, I'm excited.
So I'm keeping it in the theme of Pac-12 football, but a little cross-pollination into the SEC. So this wasn't this week 22 years ago, but this month 22 years ago. So I don't know about you guys, but when I fell in love with big-time college football, I mean like big time college football, and not growing up and going to like Dartmouth College, which is also history lesson part 2 today. I want to give a little shout out to Dartmouth College, but it was the USC Pete Carroll teams. I mean, for me, I'm a East Coast Boston kid. Boston College was not – they were okay, right? They're very bad now, but they were okay when I was growing up. But those USC games, I would stay up. I'd be 10, 11, 12, 13 years old, whatever it was, and just watch every single USC game. So a little history lesson for you. The game that really started off that run, Pete Carroll's first year, I believe, or second year, is 2002. Carson Palmer was a quarterback, and they traveled cross country to the Plains, played Auburn, and upset Auburn. The score was 24-17. I believe that 2002 Auburn team ended up being a top 5 team. It wasn't the Campbell year because he was 07, I believe. But I forgot the quarterback's name. But they flew cross country. USC was about 8-5 or 7-5 the year before. Pete Carroll ended up going to Auburn, beating Auburn. Carson Palmer was a quarterback. 2002, September 6th. And that really started a 5-year run.
Oh,
As
it was
we all
Jason Campbell.
Was it Jason Campbell in
Yeah,
02?
0104. So says Google.
Oh, very good. So it was
What?
Jason Campbell. So Roddy Brown, Cadillac Williams, I think Spikes was in that team. I mean, that team was loaded. USC goes in there. Carson Palmer goes in there. 2002, they ended up winning the Rose Bowl that year. I don't know if they won the national championship, but fast forward 5-6 years, you're looking at one of the greatest dynasties, in my opinion, in college football history. You go look at some of the guys that played in those USC teams. I mean, dudes, all across the field, offense, defense, special teams. So that's kind of my history lesson. September 2002, Auburn versus University of Southern California, Carson Palmer. And the other thing I want to hit on is, so I mentioned I'm obviously from Massachusetts, from Boston. This isn't really so much a history lesson, but more of a memory of Coach Buddy Tevens. Coach Buddy Tevens was a Dartmouth College former All Ivy League player. He coached football in the SEC actually in the late 1990s, early 2000s, associate head coach at University of Florida before getting the head job at Stanford. I got to know Buddy Tevens a couple years ago. Just a stand-up guy. He had a tragic accident where he lost his leg this past summer in a bicycle accident, but he passed away this past week. And Buddy Tevens was kind of well known in the football world. Obviously, was a head coach at Dartmouth, the all-time winningest coach at Dartmouth, his alma mater. He was an NFL quarterback for a bit, coached in the NFL as well. But just a stand-up guy. And if you look at the evolution of football in the past several years with concussions and trying to find alternative ways to practice and really transforming the game to make it safer, so we can continue to evolve as a sport. He worked with the engineers at Dartmouth College to actually mainstream or streamline, I should say, those kind of like dummies that move around, the tackling dummies, so they can do no contact at practice. So rest in peace, Buddy Tevens, a football legend, close friends with the Manning family, was part of the Manning passing camp. I'm sure there's been a number of different players at Georgia who have run into him over the years, particularly the quarterback. So rest in peace to Buddy Tevens. Not really a history lesson, but I wanted to give him a shout out. And we're excited for next week. I already got one locked in.
Hey, I love it. Well said, Artie. Well said. History class with Artie Lynch. We appreciate it, man. And I will add, so it was Ohio State and Miami in the Fiesta Bowl when Miami's 34-game winning streak was ended. That was 2002.
Maurice Claret.
Wow. Yeah, that's what I was thinking about. And that reminds me of Nick Chubb. All right. Good news. I will update. That's some good news. I'm glad I brought that up. Nick Chubb, actually a good prognosis, which was awesome. So thoughts and prayers. I'd like to say that helped from Dog Nation, and really everybody in the NFL and really in sports world was reaching out to him and commending him and praying for him. And so he just has a torn MCL. For the last time I checked, the report was there may be minor damage to the ACL, but that won't require surgery as thought. So I think that's really good for Nick Chubb. Round of applause for old Nick. We love Nick. Definition of a DDG. Definition of a GDG.
Knowing him, he might come back this season if they make the playoffs.
Oh my goodness, dude. He would be the guy to do it, right?
Yeah.
He would be the guy to do it. One of my favorites of all time. Georgia's second leading rusher, by the way, of all time. All right, so let's jump into some Auburn here. And I really just want, before we get into the numbers, I want to throw it to you, Artie, again. And let's talk about, we need to use this from you a little bit more, I think, in these shows and get the most out of you. Use you to the fullest here.
I got you.
Megan, take us through playing on the road. I know you played in that stadium. Maybe take us through anything that stands out, whether it be the locker room situation, how they set up the field and where they point you guys to go for your warm-ups and what have you. The crowd, obviously, it's one of the hardest places to play in the SEC. Rowdy guys. It's in Alabama. They have nothing else better to do. Let us know, Artie, what that is going to be like for these guys going into a game where this would make Auburn's season to upset Georgia, and it would put Hugh Freeze on a path to keep his job at least a little longer bar none.
Yeah, totally. And I think you hit the nail on the head. Is anytime minus one school, and I think we can all figure out what school that is. Every single university that is part of the SEC, their stadium atmosphere on a game day when things are feeling right, it's each place is tough to play, right? That's just the way it is. At Auburn, their visitors locker room actually isn't that bad. There are locker rooms across the league that are horrendous. Tennessee is one of them. I hate Tennessee through and through. It's just like it is
What's
what it
about it?
is. It's just small. There's like the bathroom is a dump. There's really no like showers to like stalls, no bathroom stalls. Everything's crammed. There's no place to sit. It's just kind of a mess. And the state, anyway, I can go on for days about how Tennessee is a tough place to play. But when you're thinking about Auburn, right, and you're thinking about playing at any one of these stadiums in an away game, the best thing that you possibly can do is start fast and take the crowd out of the game, right? Two stories at Auburn. Because of the realignment back in 2012 and 13, we had to play at Auburn 2 years in a row. In 2012, we beat them up. I think we beat them 38-0. And then the next year was the infamous Bobble Hail Mary. So, but tale of two teams, right? We go into that, and granted, we were a very good team in 2012. Obviously, it's well documented. Auburn was not that good that year. It was 2 years after their national championship year. But long story short, we go into that game. It's a night game, 2012. Crowds roaring, everyone's going nuts. We're ranked, I think, third in the country, fourth in the country. They want to upset up. So not too dissimilar to what we're doing right now, right? We go into that stadium, and without hesitation, we're up and down the field scoring, right? It's 7-0. Todd Gurley, Keith Marshall, Tavares King. We were all making plays, and I think the stadium was half empty at halftime. We won 38-0, right? But we took the atmosphere right out from under them, right? And we never let them get momentum behind them from their home crowd, right? Conversely, right? A year later, different scenario. Obviously, Auburn was playing for a lot more, but it was a 3:30 game, much like this one. It was so loud at the kickoff. We could not. If you go back to the game film, you can ask Aaron Murray about it. We're in gun, and we're just trying to get the handoffs and snap the ball, and we could not move for the first three drives because none of us could hear the snap. And every time we would basically turn our heads to look at the head bob to make sure we get it, I had D Ford just humming past me, and I'm just like,
dude, he was a mammoth too.
Mammoth. And so, and obviously, we ended up finishing the first half pretty strong, and we ended up taking the crowd out from under them, ending the first half. Obviously, the rest is history. We know what happens. But if you think about that, I get it. Every scenario is different. You know, if they're undefeated, they're playing for a championship, what have you. But at the end of the day, these crowds can make a huge difference. A huge difference. Another instance, when we were playing Auburn, but home, Bakari Rambo, 2011, pick six. We were kind of in a battle for, I think it was like a 14-7 game or 21-7 game. Rambo picks the ball off and pick six it into the end zone in Sanford Stadium. And all of a sudden we have the crowd like screaming bloody murder because we just got a pick six. And and next thing you know, Auburn just kind of lays down. We ended up beating them by 30 or 20 or something. So when you think about like home field advantage or playing at a hostile environment, there's so many things that crowd can do to get you off your game. It's very easy to say, hey, these guys, they're SEC players, they should be able to handle it, blase. Totally get it. and there are contingencies in place for us to be able to handle the crowd noise. But when you got a Jadavion Clowney or a D Ford or a Eric Berry lined up alongside, or a Von Miller across from you, and you can't even hear yourself think, and you're trying to see if we're running a hot audible, or if we're switching to a zone, or if we're switching to play at line of scrimmage, things can go haywire. So my piece of advice for Carson Beck and the offense: start fast, start strong, take the crowd out of the game as soon as possible, and make sure those student section is emptying out and going to the bars at halftime, and not going for refills and going back to their seats because it's a close game going into the second half.
Yeah. Oh, I love that, dude. I love those stories. That is perfect, man. Guys, that is really, really good assessment from a guy who did it, to just give you an idea. And I love that, just hearing that from you already. Tell us a little bit about that, because we're not there. We don't have that experience. So that's really awesome to hear. Speaking of bars, it is a 3:30 kick, so they're not going to be that sauced up for this one. Maybe that's an advantage for Georgia. But as far as playing in that, that really made me think, and it put something in my head that I haven't thought of until we just got on this call. Is my assessment of this game is, this obviously is the first road game for Georgia. Beyond that, it's Carson Beck's first road game in a hostile environment. He's played on the road at times, but it's been in garbage time when the crowd's already out of the game. How does he respond? How do those silent count? How do those cues go with him, the offensive linemen, the receivers and such, the running backs? Is it efficient enough to really get up on that team early? That'll be something to watch out for, something I'll be closely watching for. Before we get into numbers, let's go injury report really quick. I'm going to give 2 updates on really important guys. Ladd McConkey, we haven't seen this season yet, dealing with a nagging back. I heard him a little bit last year, was able to play through it. They're holding him out of precaution. I think it was worse than last year, just based on how Kirby Smart's talked about it, and how he was actually shut down from participating the last 2 weeks, which we just found out about this week. Kirby was actually asked about that tonight, and I'll give you a quote here. Quote, "I don't know. He did some things. He ran routes. I saw him some, but I didn't get to see him enough to really judge, and I just want to watch the tape." Smart said, "We're just trying to progress him back slowly, whether it's this week in a role or in the future. I'm not trying to rush him back." Guys, doesn't sound like he's going to play. You look back at George Pickens and A.D. Mitchell, they were ready before they ended up coming back. I really see this as a later in the season, maybe Georgia Tech kind of thing for Ladd McConkey. That's just my guess. Of course, we've seen guys come back earlier. No one knew they were going to come back and such, but that's just my guess from knowing this team and Kirby Smart. Javon Bullard actually told the Players Lounge this week. I wrote a story on it earlier. If you guys want to check it out, the Players Lounge, go to the Georgia page. It's up there. So he actually told us that his ankle was doing a lot better, and he actually is expected to return sooner rather than later. He thinks he'll be ready. So whether that's this week or next week, not sure. That's what he gave us. So that's what I wanted to pass along to you guys. Something to note, Georgia's injury list, the longest that Kirby Smart has seen in his tenure, and the longest Ron Corson. And I misspoke last week saying Claude Felton. It's Ron Corson who's the head of the medical staff. I misspoke. I realized that after I jumped off the call. But he's been there for a long time. He said it was the longest injury report Georgia's had. I think that it has affected him. I think it's notable to really keep a mind out for these things and these players that could come back in the future, and the guys are not going to have for this week. So I think, when you think about this game in Auburn, right, they have wins over Samford, Cal, and Mass. Not the level of opponent that they're going to be facing this week, not the level of opponent they faced last week in Texas A&M. I was watching that game pretty closely in preparation. 27-10 loss at A&M. Tough place to play. I get it. It's a noon kick, though. Only touchdown scored was a fumble recovery. So that offense still has a lot of work to do under Hugh Freeze. Do I think he'll be able to do it in the future? Sure. I think they're going to be winning games here in the future with their offense. But right now it's that defense that's going to give Georgia trouble. I don't think the offense will. Before I move that defense, I do want to note a couple of offensive things here. Passing game is really what holding them back. 173 yards per game. Really down there in the rankings. Peyton Thorne has struggled. The transfer, wouldn't be surprised if we saw a lot of Robbie Ashford this game. I think they're better as really, Artie, you could speak to this as well. Maybe even a triple option kind of thing, old school Auburn, not old school, but when you were playing Auburn, in the day, maybe something like that from a gun with Robbie Ashford as a running back, as a rushing quarterback, because I mean, they have Jarquez Hunter, who's a tough running back, really talented. Maybe that opens up for him a little bit more if they use Robbie Ashford. But I just don't think Thorne's going to really be able to do much against this number one ranked Georgia passing defense, minus their best player in Bullard, right? They haven't had him a couple games, and they're still right there in passing defense. Defense is tough. Like I said, 167-yard passing allowed per game, one of the tops in the SEC. Haven't been as tough against the run. You know, that's where A&M got them last week in their first SEC game, 134 allowed per game, up to that point, 209 to A&M. I do like linebacker Eugene Asante, got 20 stops, 2 sacks this season, somebody to watch out for. Artie, first thoughts on this game? We can go ahead and jump in predictions, add anything you'd like, and we'll end it with your predictions. I'll note the line is Georgia minus 16.5 right now, over under 46.
Yeah, so he obviously has an interesting history, Hugh Freeze, but a successful one as a football coach. He really was the first one to get Ole Miss up and running in my lifetime, at least my lifetime of really watching college football. So he is a very capable coach, and I think he's a hell of a recruiter. I think he's showing that. So I think in the years to come, Auburn is actually going to be in very good hands. But with that being said, I just don't I don't necessarily think that they have the depth to really go, toe to toe with an SEC, a real SEC opponent, right? A&M, for all of their flaws, they have a ton of talent and they have a ton of depth, and but they're not a very well-oiled machine. They still handily beat them. I spoke with somebody who's kind of an Auburn donor, knows the team very well, knows the coaching staff very well, spent time with the coaching staff. And they even said, they're like, our guys play hard, and you can see that. They went out to Cal and beat Cal in like a 14-10 game. And so I think he has the team believing, but the coaching staff themselves, based off the person I spoke with, they just don't have the guys right now. And when it's very tough to play a team like Georgia, no matter how emotionally charged you are, no matter what the atmosphere is like. If you just don't have the depth and the weapons to go toe to toe with a team like Georgia, it's very hard to compete. So I think Georgia's going to play very well. I think it'll probably be a little bit back and forth for probably one quarter, and then I think things just start rolling in Georgia's favor about halfway through the second, and then probably around 21-7 going to the half, and then ends up being about, my guess is 38-14 or 44-14, something like that. So I think Georgia wins big, but I do think the first quarter probably looks a little bit more competitive than people would like, and I think that will probably have to do with what Hugh Freeze can do from a play calling perspective, off the script, and then ultimately just kind of the atmosphere that is, Auburn.
Yeah. So you said 38-10. What'd you say? 38-14?
I think it's going to be like 44-14. I bet you like 21.
So you like Georgia to cover, and
what's
the
the spread?
Spread 16.5, and the over-under is 46.5.
Yeah. I like
so you got them. Yeah, you got them covering.
It's only 16.5.
Yeah. Yeah. I think Vegas is really banking on this SEC road game for Carson Beck. The way he performed in UT Martin in his first game. This is basically his first game kind of over again. Obviously not, specifically, but
that makes sense. Makes sense.
That's just my guess. But, for me, I think a few things will happen. I think you're going to see Georgia not respect these receivers at all. I don't think they're going to respect the passing game at all. I think they're going to mix up their coverages really. I think they're going to get a pick, maybe two. Thorne, if they keep him in and let him pass, he's thrown three picks to 4 interceptions. 3 picks to 4 touchdowns this year already. Georgia leads the SEC in interceptions. I think they get a pick in this game or two. And I think that respect that they don't give to the receivers really forces them to run the ball, which Georgia is so good at doing. But I do think you see those rush yards start to pile up in the second half for Auburn, because that's really what they're going to be able to do at the only thing. And I see this offense for Georgia. I think I see a slow start here, man. I'm not gonna lie. I think the nerves a little bit, maybe for Carson again. I think he gets over it. I think the Georgia offense gets over it, establishes that run game eventually. So I do like your thought about the first quarter battle, maybe first half battle. But I think Georgia pulls away. Like you said, they don't have the guys. So I like 30-10 Georgia. I'll take the under, and I'll take Georgia to cover by 3.5. So I like 30-10 in this game. Guys, it's been great. Arthur, thanks again for joining us here, trying to get this up and running. Hopefully we'll get on during people's routine. Maybe join us on Tuesday nights at 8 Eastern the rest of the season. We love doing it. We'll post this in a different format on the YouTube channel in case you missed. I'll add some things into it, maybe another segment from myself. I also go off on Spotify and Apple. If you miss it there, you can listen every week. UGA Football Live on Twitter, UGA Wire. I have words there. Also, editor for the Players Lounge. Making sure to check us out, original content each week. Arthur, it's been great, man. Have a good night. Also, one thing I want to leave you with: go Braves and go Dogs.
Go Dogs.
Thanks, guys.